Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar organised by the ATRF Public Transport Committee. My name is John Nelson from the University of Sydney, ITLS, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator for our webinar this afternoon. Before we begin our meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and pay respects to their elders, past, present and future. Thank you very much for joining us for what promises to be a very exciting and innovative webinar on the topic of on-demand public transport in Australia and New Zealand. We have three excellent speakers, and I'll be introducing them ahead of their respective presentations. This event is organised by the Public Transport Research Committee of ATRF. We're a relatively new entity chaired by Graham Curry from Monash University, and I'd also like to acknowledge Seka Sumanhali from UniSA, who has worked with me to organise today's webinar. Before we go any further, there are just a small number of housekeeping notices to be aware of. We'll be running the three presentations consecutively, and then we'll move into a Q&A session. We would invite everybody to participate using the Q&A function and typing in your questions. And if you would like to, and we'd encourage this to include your name and affiliation as well. And then when we get to the appropriate point, I will moderate the Q&A. There will be a recording of this session, and that will be shared via the PTRC web and social media channels, and the details were circulating at the start of the webinar. Our first presentation is going to be given to us by John Devney. John is a principal engineer, transport with Tonkin, and he has over 40 years of experience in planning transport systems in Australia and in Canada. And John specialises in public transport network planning and feasibility studies for bus, light rail, heavy rail and ferry modes, and he's been actively involved in public transport plans and bus network reviews in many countries, including Australia, Canada, USA and the UAE. John, it's a great pleasure to have you participating in our webinar this afternoon, and I'll now hand over to you for your presentation.
All right. Thank you, John, and thank you everyone who's attending today. First, I'm going to share my screen and set up the presentation. So. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's presentation is about the role for on-demand public transport in metropolitan cities. In recent years, on-demand public transport has been implemented in many cities throughout Australia with several successful applications. However, some are still operating as trials with low patronage, poor financial performance, or the reluctance for permanent government funding. In this presentation, the different roles and locations for providing on-demand transport services in metropolitan cities are discussed under the following topics: opportunities for on-demand bus transport, a service level classification approach to decide where it's most appropriate to implement it, the roles for on-demand bus transport in different metropolitan areas, proposed types of on-demand bus transport and different operating models, and then I'll show some examples in case of the application of on-demand transport in selected metropolitan cities, and then provide some conclusions. So here's a selection of on-demand transport services that currently exist. Some of them are in Sydney. There's one there, a Flexi Ride bus in Melbourne. There's a Keo Ride service in the Mount Barker area east of Adelaide. And I've also shown an example in the bottom center image that is on-demand transport in Edmonton in Canada, which is part of their integrated public transport system. In this presentation, I'm not discussing the why, or the how, or the what to operate on-demand public transport, because that is well covered by others. The topic today is to propose a strategic framework to identify where on-demand transport is most suited in a metropolitan city. I'm also not discussing the viability, business cases, or funding for on-demand public transport, or when to implement it. So there have been mixed success with on-demand public transport with the trials. Many of them started in 2018, and some have come and gone, and some are still very successful and part of the systems that they operate in. The recent applications of on-demand bus transport have been implemented in outer suburban areas that typically have lower service levels and a dispersed lower density residential population that can be difficult to service with fixed route bus services. There have also been some applications of on-demand transport in some of the inner urban fringe suburbs where there is limited public transport for non-CBD trips without making the trips to the city center. Another role for on-demand public transport is it can address the issues for transfer trips where there are uncoordinated, infrequent, or shorter operating hours in the evenings and on weekends when demand is much less. In recent years, a role for on-demand transport has been shown in more recent bus network reviews and route hierarchies. For example, in 2013, Transport for New South Wales released a white paper with a comprehensive review of Sydney's on-street transit or bus network. On-demand transport was included as the fourth tier after rapid, frequent, and local fixed route services, and that's highlighted, with the blue. So it's actually considered a key part of the mix of the bus transport in Sydney. Then earlier in 2024, the Committee for Sydney prepared an independent assessment of Sydney's bus network with the Plan B report. They included on-demand transport as a tier 4 in a 5-tier hierarchy, as shown here on this diagram, and I've shaded it in light blue. In 2021, Victoria prepared a statewide bus plan with 4 categories in a route hierarchy, with Category 1 for rapid routes, Category 2 connector routes, Category 3 for local routes, and under Category 3, it included the on-demand flexi ride services that have been implemented in several locations in Greater Melbourne and also parts of regional Victoria. In 2021, Winnipeg in Canada, they prepared a transit master plan, and a key part of that transit master plan was developing what they call service classes. And the diagram on the left side of the screen is showing what their service class hierarchy was proposed in the transit master plan. The diagram on the right is how it's now been implemented, and they actually implemented it in full operation with a full network redesign. And in both cases, they've implemented on request, what they call on request, what we call on demand. So on request services are part of the mix. So out of those different types of service level hierarchies, I'm proposing a simpler high-level strategic bus service level classes that are high, medium, and low. So and the purpose of this is to try and simplify this to apply it for identifying where on-demand transport would be most applicable. So where there's a high service frequency of services running every 15 minutes or more often, 7 days a week, operating from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., that's a very high service, and typically it's called turn up and go services if you're a random arrival. Then the second class of service is what I'm proposing is medium, which is for every 16 to 30 minutes. Operating at least 5 to 6 days a week from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So this is a little less attractive as a public transport offering. And then the third category is low, which is less often than every 30 minutes. And that's every 5 days a week or less often with no weekend or evening services. So this framework is used to develop the what I'm going to call the strategic framework to identify where on-demand transport is most suitable in a metropolitan area. And in doing that, I'm going to refer to inner, middle, and outer urban suburbs. And so most of the examples and the information I'm presenting today is from either Greater Sydney, Greater Melbourne, or Greater Adelaide, but it could be used in other capital cities and applied elsewhere. So this map on the screen is Greater Sydney, and I'm also identified the B line and the Sydney Metro that are key parts of where on-demand transport has been successful in Sydney. And then these two maps are showing the inner, middle, and outer areas for Greater Melbourne and Greater Adelaide. So with that context, then I've developed what I'm proposing is a frequency transfer matrix, which is using that high, medium, and low service classes. And the purpose of this is to try and identify where on-demand transport would be most likely viable or most suitable. And I'm suggesting that would be where you've got high-frequency services and low-frequency services where they're connecting together, typically in the outer suburban areas. In areas where you've got medium and low-frequency services connecting, and that's typically in the middle or outer suburban areas. And also if you're in the outer areas where you've only got low frequency services available. Where it's not applicable is if you're in the inner CBD area or where you've got a lot of the bus network and the train network, and whether it's tram or light rail all converging together is probably not as applicable there. In 2021, Deloitte in Canada prepared a paper on the future of urban mobility. They identified 3 types of on-demand public transport, namely first and last mile services to a transit hub, on-demand transport to smaller zones in inner urban areas, and thirdly, transport to fill the gaps in a fixed route network in the lower density suburban areas and for off-peak times when patronage is lower. So they provided that as a framework for the different types of on-demand public transport. I've taken those ideas and then developed one that I'm proposing today, which is a type A, B, and C types of on-demand transport operating models. And so type A is a feeder service from a dispersed low-density area to a high-frequency public transport hub, where you've got services operating every 10 or every 15 minutes for extended hours, and then connecting with a low-frequency area. Type B is what I call a flexible service, where it's going to one or more local hub destinations within a zoned area. And then type 3 is what I consider is zoned anywhere service over a service catchment area where you can go from anywhere to anywhere within that specific catchment. So by using those three types, then I'm looking at where are they most applicable in the inner, middle, and outer suburban areas of a metropolitan area. And so this diagram here, or a table, is showing where type A and B and C are most likely to be applicable. So type A is where you've got high to low services connecting, or low to high services connecting. And then we've got type B, which is more in where you've got medium frequency services connecting with medium frequencies. There is a role for on-demand transport in those areas, or in areas where it is you only have infrequent services. And where it's probably not needed at all is in the CBD area, like I mentioned before. So I'm now going to present several examples of where those types A, B, and C operations of on-demand public transport are been in operation. And so in Sydney, two excellent examples of what I call type A feeder services are operating with the Keo ride at the northern extent of the B line service from Narrabeen, Mona Vale, and to the north in that area there. And it's been very successful there. The other area is at the northwesternmost part of the Sydney Metro at Rouse Hill and Tallawong stations. And so there's an operation there. The other area where it's been relatively successful is in the inner west part of Sydney, in Canada Bay, Olympic Park, and that area there. So I've got more detailed information on those three examples. So this is a map of the coverage area for the Keo ride on the northern beaches. It's split into two service areas, but focused mostly on taking people to the B line services. And then this is an example of the service catchment area in Schofields and Tallawong at the northwest or the westernmost part of Sydney Metro. And both of these have been quite successful and continue to be operating. In the inner west of Sydney, another operation, they operate two zoned areas. And focusing on Lidcombe Station and Olympic Park, but also in Canada Bay with services to Burwood and Strathfield. So this is another example where it can apply in a middle suburban area. In Edmonton in Canada, I mentioned before that they implemented on-demand transport in their bus network in 2021. And as part of that, they had some gaps in their service area that they covered with an on-demand transport service. And they implemented several areas, and some of them were in the inner urban areas. So this location here is about 4 to 5 kilometers west of the downtown or CBD of Edmonton, and the services are focused on going to two shopping centers or transit hubs at Westmount and Jasper Place. So that's an example where on-demand can apply in that area. There are multiple examples of type B types of operation in Greater Melbourne. I've shown just three of them here. One of them is the Flexi Ride service at Tarnet V-Line train station in western suburbs of Melbourne. There's another Flexi Ride service to Greensboro and Eltham stations here. And so basically it has a service coverage area that goes to two stations. And then there's another one out at Croydon and Mulrobark stations. On these next 3 slides, I'm showing the service coverage area. And so this is the coverage area for the Flexi Ride service at Tarnet station. And from what I understand, this has been very successful getting people out of Park and Ride and using the Flexi Ride service to go to this station. This is the service coverage area for the one at Greensboro and Eltham. So it's a relatively hilly area here, and the regular fixed route services don't cover it very well. So on-demand is quite applicable there. And then the last example of several that are in Greater Melbourne is at Croydon and Moorobark Station. So there are some examples of what I call Type C on-demand transport in Greater Adelaide. One of them is a service at the northern end of the Gawler railway line, and it's has limitations, and it's a bit of a legacy kind of on-demand service. And so, but it's still designated as on-demand. But the more successful one is at Mount Barker with the Keo Ride service there that was been implemented. And that is, from my understanding, is very popular with the locals and for local trips. And this is those two examples there are shown on these two service coverage maps. So this is the coverage area for the on-demand service in Gawler, and this is the service area for the on-demand in Mount Barker, which also has been expanded to include Nairn and Littlehampton, two are smaller village communities. And the last example is Keo Ride in Newcastle. Newcastle Transport is an integrated transport operator for the bus network, the light rail, and the ferry services in Newcastle, but also they have implemented an on-demand transport service area. And so I would consider this a Type C type operation, which covers in this area of Belmont and takes people to Charlestown shopping area. So in conclusion, I suggest there's a much greater role for on-demand public transport as part of the public transport service hierarchy, as shown in the other service hierarchies from Sydney, Melbourne, and those other cities. It's not relevant in CBD or the inner urban areas where you've got a high frequency service, and especially we've got good coverage with a rail or a tram or a light rail network. But there certainly is an opportunity for more of them to be implemented in the outer suburban areas where there's low service levels. And also to focus on high-frequency transit hubs like the examples in Sydney at the northern end of the B line service or the outer end of Sydney Metro. There also is a role for them to consider in the inner urban fringe areas where the existing bus network, especially if it's focused mostly on CBD trips, doesn't cover for people who need to do inner urban non-CBD trips. So that's my presentation, and those are the conclusions. And I think that there is certainly a more significant role for on-demand public transport to be implemented in capital cities.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John.
I will stop sharing there, or somebody else can take over. Yeah.
I think if you stop sharing, that's
I just stop. Okay, and you share. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the service level classification approach, which I think is good food for thought. Just a reminder to everyone that the questions and comments should be submitted via the Q&A, and if your question is for a specific speaker, you may wish to mark it as such, but of course we also will have the possibility of taking the questions to be answered by multiple speakers as well. So we're going to move on straight away to our second speaker, and it's a pleasure to introduce Sue Wiblin. Sue is the Executive Director of Emerging Technologies at Transport for New South Wales, and Sue has over 20 years of experience leading public transport and urban mobility projects across a variety of organisations, including property groups, membership bodies, government sector, and so on. And that gives her a unique experience in helping to develop solutions to address complex challenges. And Sue's going to bring that perspective to the issue of on-demand transport. Over to you, Sue.
Great. Thanks, John. I will just bring up the presentation. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yep.
Great. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Can you put it into presentation mode?
I can indeed. Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant.
So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the invite. Yeah, I'm very excited to speak about this topic. So I'm currently an executive director with Transport for New South Wales, but prior to that I was working with one of the operators and was involved in delivering some of these pilots in New South Wales. So I thought first starting point for us is really looking at when in New South Wales we really started the journey of on-demand transport around 2016. And it's important to set the scene. So the minister at the time really thought that on-demand services and sort of data-generated transport would really abolish timetabled services and would really have the end of government-supplied vehicles within the next 10 or 15 years. So that was the backdrop to what happened in New South Wales. And innovation and the incubation of new transport modes was really front and centre of their agenda. And it's important to keep this in mind because it really feeds into why things happened the way they did and where we are now in terms of how we're thinking about on-demand transport services. So the government funded 23 pilots across the state, and they deliberately selected different models because they wanted to align to their scale agenda. So they threw out to industry the challenge really to come back to them with different types of on-demand services that could operate in different ways in the networks that could potentially scale within the next 10 years. At the same time, the government also contracted the Newcastle Integrated Network as part of their innovation agenda, which brought together all the transport modes into one contract, which is the first time, I think, probably, and there's probably people on this call that know that that's actually happened in Australia. And as part of that, there was also the on-demand service, which was actually part of the network and not introduced as a trial. And then in 2018, more services were introduced to support transport assets coming online. So as John mentioned, the Kui service, which supports the Northwest Metro, and then also the Northwest and the Bridge Inner West service, which supports network changes. And there was also another service that supported the Northwest Metro called Metro Connect. So today, these are the on-demand services. So they were all the trials and pilots that were run, but today these are the services that are operating in New South Wales. So of the original 23 pilots, Kia Ride continues. You have both Kui and the Bridge that were introduced to services to support the network changes. And what's been really, really successful in New South Wales is the regional and rural applications. So of the 11 trials, we now still have 8 operating as on-demand services effectively. And I'll talk about that in a bit more in the next few slides. But and John spoke about these services as well, so I'll try not to sort of cross over some of the things he said. But both the Kia Ride service and the Kui service have been very successful, and they are very similar in their applications. So both services connect into high frequency modes. So Kia Ride the B line and Kui into the Northwest Metro. But they also both commenced on the same day that those services opened. So when B-Line commenced services, Kia Ride started, and when the Metro first opened, Kui started. So for lots of people, the first time they ever connected into the B-Line or into the Metro was in one of these services, which created really great habits from the start. There's also around the stations, both the B-Line stations that Kia Ride supports and the Kui stations that supports. there's very little parking as well. So it is difficult to get to. And the stations are contained within housing density that means lots of people need to travel at the same time. So, you know, still in the morning peaks. And obviously we've seen some changes in that since COVID, but very, very similar characteristics. And both of those services also seem to have similar features that customers rate highly. So both services have drivers. The quality of drivers always comes up as the first thing that people like about the services, but also the experiences on board. The other service, so the bridge service, which is again, and you know, to John's description of how that fits into a network hierarchy, is quite a different service. And you see there's less patronage in that service. And some of that, we believe, is because in that area of Sydney, you're actually spoilt for choice. So when you've got a wait time of 18 minutes, you've actually got some other options that you could choose, you know, whether it's a ferry or a bus or a train, but you've got actually other options that you could look at within that time horizon, whereas in the other two services, you really don't. And what we find also with the other two services is because when you book on demand, you typically book within a time window of about 30 minutes. So, and because you're connecting into a high frequency mode, that time horizon becomes less important because, you know, when I get there, I'm only going to have to wait at maximum another 4 minutes for a service. So that works really well from an operational perspective. When you put on-demand services into more urban areas or, you know, CBD areas, you tend to then have people who, as I said, who have lots of choices around what they might want to do. And if I have to wait 18 minutes for an on-demand, I might as well just, you know, choose another option, which is what often happens. And the rating there that reflects that. So when you look at why you're getting 70%, 76% of people saying it's a great service, mostly that's to do with the ETA time for that service. So so it really does look at where on-demand works well and, you know, where it's less effective. But also then in regional New South Wales, and apologies, I've got the patronage figures for this. I just didn't get them in time, but I can certainly share them post this so that you can see what they look like. So, but certainly a lot lower. We're not seeing, you know, 18,000 trips a month in regional areas. But what we are seeing is there's more trips. So since than there was on the traditional bus services in regional areas. And on-demand in regional New South Wales has really created an offer for customers that's far more appealing than a traditional route services. And because of the types of trips that people use the on-demand for, so medical appointments, shopping, you know, scheduled things, then people are less concerned about wait times. So in a regional context, you can schedule a service or you can design a service with less vehicles and longer scheduled ETA times because people are less concerned about that. It's more about reliability and being able to get to their appointments. And, you know, John touched on the Gawler service in South Australia, and there was also for a time a Mount Barker service as well. People didn't mind if they had to book 3 days in advance. They were more concerned about making sure that they would have a vehicle available to them when they wanted because they were scheduled appointments. And then when we come to Newcastle, which is also really interesting, as I said, Newcastle was the first service that was integrated into a contract. And while the operator launched the service on top of the network, it was always part of the network plan. And over the last, you know, 3 years or so, it's really been just considered another bus in the network, which is something I'll talk about in the next few slides. But given that it was part of the contract, it was not a separate expense on top of the contract in the same way that pilots have been. It gave the Newcastle planners the opportunity to really look at where you want to push people towards an on-demand service and where you want to push people towards the route services. So in Newcastle, one of the things that made this service successful as well and such a meaningful part of the network up there is that route services just were not practical for so many of the people. And because of the density, it wasn't possible to necessarily run lots and lots of more buses. So having fewer buses who can come to you is something that works really well, but it wouldn't work well if it was not part of the overall network plan. And I think that that's part of the learnings for on-demand generally, is that when you put anything on top of a network with a separate fleet and a separate operation and all the things, all the additional costs on top of it, it does become an expensive option. And then I thought it was important also to mention the e-bike model in Newcastle, which is also considered an on-demand service. And so what's interesting about the e-bike service in Newcastle is also that the placement of the bike considered the integration with the public transport network. And while it's not operated by Newcastle Transport, there's a close affiliation between the bike share and the transport services so that you can maximise the value of that active mode as part of a network feeder. So where are we today with on-demand services in transport? And so, you know, considering the backdrop again of this, when on-demand was first introduced into New South Wales, the government described it as a Netflix for transport. And really, you know, a panacea for bus networks generally, that on-demand was going to come in and sweep in and replace bus services and, you know, and be a whole lot of things that it probably wasn't ever going to be. But what happened with that narrative was that it was often seen as elitist and it was expensive. And unfortunately, those old press releases, which were many years ago now, that came out with the cost per passenger for on-demand services in New South Wales, which essentially I think took the first month of patronage and divided it by the total contract cost, are something that's really stuck in people's mind and particularly in the public's mind. And so there is very much a view that we ran lots of trials and very few of them worked. And on-demand is only something that works in very contained areas. So when the New South Wales government ran lots of trials, there was no expectation that all of those services would continue or work. The point was to get to scale as quickly as possible, so to understand as quickly as possible where on-demand would and wouldn't work in a network. So, but what on-demand is, it is a legitimate public transport mode, you know, that is flexible and adaptable. And during COVID, we saw that. So both the Kui service and the Keo Ride services were able to be overnight retailored to meet the changing patronage needs of those communities. So rather than being feeder services into metros or B-lines, they became services that connected people into shopping and medical trips. And while we saw patronage fall off a cliff for all the services, on-demand service patronage came back much more quickly and was less impacted than route services. So it's an amazingly flexible tool that can be used as a suite of tools for bus services in New South Wales if it's applied properly. And in terms of the costs, buses are expensive. So large diesel buses that run around the network today are highly subsidised and are expensive. So on-demand services can be delivered for the same or close to cost per passenger as a low-frequency, low-patronised bus. But what they can do is they can build revenue on customers in the way that those services never will. So if you've got an on-demand service that you're replacing a low frequency and low patronage bus, you can suddenly start to transport a lot more people than you would have been in the existing services. So I think, you know, and maybe not quite as eloquently as John has categorized it, but we need to start thinking about these types of services as just another bus type. So we have, you know, BRTs and we have route services and we have express buses. In New South Wales, we have all-day frequent network buses. On-demand buses just fit into that overall network plan, and they can be introduced in the day or the night. You know, it doesn't have to be a route you might have in the morning. It might be a normal route bus during the day because patronage is lower. It becomes an on-demand service. So I think, you know, there's a real opportunity for planners, for government and for operators to sort of look at how we incorporate all of these different types of buses together to drive outcomes that passengers will connect to. And, you know, particularly now in a post-COVID world where we've got so many local trips happening, you know, people are commuting into the city less days than they were previously. And route services that run on 30 or 60-minute headways during the day just are not a viable option for people to move around the local area. We're also looking at the moment, we're transitioning to electric fleets, which gives us a huge opportunity to look at composition of our bus fleets, because that's one of the issues fundamentally in the operation of an on-demand fleet is the cost of the additional vehicles. So they're not assets that they're using as much as you're using a full-size bus. But really, in the current environment, do we need as many full-size buses? Maybe we can look at fleet composition so that these assets become more viable as part of a network as well. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to use on-demand more broadly in networks and move away. I think we've learnt so much over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of how to actually incorporate on-demand into networks by replacing kilometres of fixed route services for roughly the same price envelope. So I think that, yeah, sadly in New South Wales, there is a hangover of we did this a lot, lots of it didn't work. But I think it would be very sad to lose the learnings of that and not apply them in a way that can be very, very beneficial both for governments and for communities. So thank you, and happy to take any questions in the question period.
Thank you very much, Sue. It's a very nice update on the New South Wales experience, and you heard there a reminder to use the Q&A function as well to feed in your questions. Our third and final presentation, after which we will go to the Q&A session, is by Robert Yeh. Robert is a research student at ITLS, University of Sydney, and he has wide-ranging research interests in various aspects of public transport, intelligent transport systems, and spatial analysis. And Robert's PhD topic is on various aspects of on-demand transport, and particularly the development of a systematic and context-dependent evaluation approach. So, Robert, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you on the introduction from John. And I'm Robert, a PhD student from ITLS, the University of Sydney. So I'm very happy to be here to have a talk to share my research regarding on-demand transport. So as we know, on-demand transport is challenging to operate, and the failure rate is very high. However, the transport mode raises attention nowadays as it can improve the accessibility and it can address the social inclusion issue, especially in the rural areas. So the analysis before and after implementation is very important and necessary. So the analysis before the implementation can help policymakers identify the best design of on-demand transport, while the analysis after the operation can help learn from the lessons. So today I will be discussing an ex-ante assessment and ex-post assessment approach to address the challenge. So this is the outline of the presentation today. First, I will briefly introduce the goals and designs of on-demand transport, and then move on to the topic of how to identify the service area of on-demand transport before implementation, which is the ex-ante assessment. So we develop a systematic approach to identifying potential spots and assessing their performance through the simulation, which is called agent-based modeling approach. And this process is called suitable placement of on-demand transport, that is SPOT. So the research outcome is mainly contributed by my supervisor, Chin. I think he's also online with us today. The topic covered today will be based on the paper listed in the footnote. On the other hand, on-demand transport operational data is valuable and can reveal not only the travel pattern, but also to identify the influential factors that will impact on the performance of on-demand transport. So we will apply the data envelopment analysis approach to measure the efficiency of each on-demand transport route. The topic covering ex-post assessment will refer to my other work, which is published in the second paper listed in the footnote. So finally, the last part concludes the discussions today. So let's begin with a quick introduction to on-demand transport from the literature. So it has emerged as a viable solution to improve the accessibility of public transport, and it is usually located in the remote areas where the patronage of the public transport is quite low, or maybe there has no any public transport service, or it might be located in the suburban area where the population density is relatively low compared to the urban area. So the on-demand transport was initially designed to provide a service for the passenger with special needs, such as the elderly, disabled people, or transport advantageous people. The goals of on-demand transport include, but are not limited to the following: promoting social inclusion, enhancing the efficiency use of the resource, promoting the environmental sustainability, and to make a more integrated public transport network. So overall, these goals can be aligned with the ESG, which means the environmental, societal, and governance sustainability. So on-demand transport is well known for its operational flexibility. The service is flexible regarding routes, stops, and schedule. And the table on the right summarizes all the operational modules mentioned in the existing studies. So this model classification might be similar to the first speaker, John, proposed, such as Type A feeder service is like a point-to-point on-demand transport. And Type B flexible service is like the many-to-few or many-to-one that connect the main transport hubs or the point of interest. And Type C, zoned anywhere service, is similar to the point-to-point service in a specific area. But we will not go through all the models in detail, but we can see the flexibility of on-demand transport is varied and can be applied in different contexts. And many studies address the operational model as an important factor in success. For example, a simple model such as many-to-one or medium point-to-hub service is considered to be the optimal one in the papers. But still, the operation of on-demand transport is quite challenging with high failure rate and with high operating cost. So the presentation today raises two main questions: how to identify optimal service area of on-demand transport to deliver their goals, and how to best to measure the performance of on-demand transport given their intended purpose. The ex-ante assessment process is used to identify the optimal service area based on the geographical features, social demographics, and the current public transport network. After identifying the potential spots, the simulation through an agent-based modeling approach can be applied to derive the key performance indicators such as average travel time, average waiting time, and so forth. The ex-post assessment leverages the operational data to evaluate the performance of on-demand transport, and the indicators include output variables such as patronage, load factor, and input variables such as the number of vehicles assigned and number of rounds. After deriving the efficiency score, the exogenous variables here can be utilized to explore the crucial factors that influence the efficiency, that is the performance of on-demand transport. And this framework will help understand the underlying factors to success through empirical results and give feedback to future operations. Now, let's take a detailed look at the first study, which is the X&T assessment, also called spot identification research. We call it SPOT, which is suitable placement for on-demand transport. The study aims to develop an evidence-based approach to integrating on-demand transport service into the existing public transport network. And this study incorporates the known factors impacting on-demand transport service in the existing studies. For example, there are many studies mention that many to one or many to few and point-to-hub service are optimal service design. And the operation model will be applied in the following simulation analysis. In terms of the use of on-demand transport, workers, students, and millennials are more inclined to use the new service, to adopt these kind of new service in the early stage. So the related social demographic variables will be used as the factors in ranking the service area. And next, as the proposed on-demand transport service area might intersect with the existing public transport network, we can replace the one with poor bus service to enhance both network efficiency and social equity. Here is the spot identification framework. First, we identify potential service regions with patched demand using GTFS and patronage data, which comes from the public transport data. And in this study, the regions with low bus trips per vehicle kilometer are selected. And the second step is to form the on-demand transport service area using like neighboring analysis or the cluster analysis. After that, we determine the potential hubs using point of interest data and rank them based on their utility for on-demand transport users. We then identify underperforming bus routes for a potential replacement with on-demand transport. And using the social demographic and transport index, we can further rank the service areas and find the most suitable one. Within a specific area, the agent-based model is used to simulate the operation of on-demand transport and assess its performance. So in this study, we use Auckland and Sydney as two examples as the study area. The first step of this process is to find the patched demand regions as potential location for on-demand transport. So as the map shows here, the potential service regions are marked red here, and they are often located in the area where current public transport does not perform well, or even they have plenty of the public transport service. And the second step uses a neighboring analysis to identify and group all neighboring regions together to form the service area. After that, we can find the best one hubs or few hubs for each service area based on the utility function here. So in this function, it means that, for example, Dij is the total demand from point I and hub J. Here, the point I is the centroid of the statistical area, and Tij represents the travel time or waiting time. Therefore, the utility function can proxy the dissatisfaction of connecting to the hub. We can select the hub which yield the highest utility. And the existing bus network can be replaced by on-demand transport within the service areas. This replacement would not have much adverse impact on social equity, but would enable higher efficiency. So for example, in this figure, the red road represents the replaced bus road, which means that the conventional public transport might not be performed well as it expected. So here we incorporate the success factors mentioned in the literature to rank the service area. And these success factors include trips per vehicle kilometers, number of disabled and elderly people, population density, and so forth. We use a simple ranking method, which divides each success factor into quantiles and scores. Individual scores can then sum up to obtain a composite index that ranks the service area according to their total scores. So take Sydney, for example, in this table. It shows that Glenhaven tops the list, followed by West Hoxton and Illawong. These three areas have relatively more elderly people and a higher proportion of indigenous people and low-income earners. These groups of people would benefit from on-demand transport services. And then in the final step, we simulate the operation and estimate the performance of on-demand transport in the proposed areas through agent-based modeling approach. This model evaluates on-demand transport performance given vehicle fleet size and passenger demand. We focus on an on-demand transport operation model where passenger request rides dynamically without pre-booking. the model is more random and dynamic because vehicles may detour to pick up additional passengers. As the table shows on the right, the key performance indicators might include average waiting and travel time, revenue generating time, total detour per car, and so forth to demonstrate the outcome of the simulation. So this can further be compared across different service areas. Okay, so the second study we will mention is that the post-assessment, which means that after we obtain the operational data, we can evaluate the performance by using those data. So in this study, we aim to measure the performance through data environment analysis and identify the key external and built environmental factors. So what is DEA, data environment analysis? This is a common performance evaluation approach and has been widely used in the transport context such as aviation, maritime, and so forth. And it is well known for its advantage of providing objective measurement without setting any subjective weight to input and output variables. And the concept of performance in this model is illustrated in the figure here. The efficiency frontier is the maximum output given a specific input. So any point lying on this frontier can be regarded as the efficient decision-making unit. So for instance, point A in this figure, it is not viewed as the efficient unit because it lies within the frontier. And the efficiency score can be measured by PR divided by PA. So similarly, if the point is right on the frontiers, let's take R for example, then the efficiency score must be 1. So it is a very simple evaluation model but very powerful techniques to evaluate the performance. So by using this model, the study uses 36 on-demand transport routes in Taiwan as a case study to demonstrate the performance evaluation method. So first, we need to collect the operational data of on-demand transport and select the appropriate input and output variables. In this study, output variables include total passengers, vehicle kilometer traveled, and load factor. Input variables include number of rounds, total seat numbers, operating kilometers, and number of vehicles. So here is the result. The figure above shows the efficiency score for each service route. The efficiency score is a relative value, so we can compare and identify the routes with poor outcomes compared to each other. And for example, here, route 13 to route 18 performs worse than any other route in the study area. And in addition to this efficiency score, the slacks of input variables are shown in the figure here, which represents the differences between ideal inputs and the actual inputs. So we can see that routes 13 to 18 have too much input in the operating features, operating distance. So which is because that these two routes serve in the mountainside area and have a longer travel distance. So if we can separate them into 2 different service routes or 2 different service areas, perhaps it can improve the overall efficiency. So as you can see, this analysis method can provide insight into the improvement strategies and learn from other units which yield better performance. So DEA is not only limited to the score evaluation. It has many more applications. For example, we can tackle the efficiency score as the dependent variable and use the external and built factors as explanatory variables to explore the potential factors that will influence the performance of on-demand transport. So this table shown here is the outcome of a simple regression analysis of the case study in Taiwan. So surprisingly, the model shows that the number of heavy railway stations has significant negative impacts on performance. As you can imagine, this result is very unexpected. If we review the purpose of providing on-demand transport service to those areas, or what we have mentioned in the ex-ante assessment approach, the main travel purpose is to access the main public transport. So this might be because heavy railway stations in this study area are not an essential location the resident needs to access for their daily needs. So in addition, routes targeting the necessary daily trips also have a negative impact on performance, which is labeled as basic travel service. So this is also an unexpected and bizarre result. It indicates that the service aim of the on-demand transport that the transport sector expected might not be aligned with what the residents really need. So this study further suggests a redefining of the role on-demand transport. Potentially, it can play a role in the tourist industry. So we go further explore the connectivity of railway station to each attraction sites to the conventional public transport station. We can find that most of the attraction sites near the on-demand transport routes cannot be directly accessible by existing public transport, which means that tourists from the other districts will find it difficult to travel without private cars. And based on the model result, knowing that on-demand transport may not only be confined to addressing necessary travel needs, policymakers should consider how tourist sites can be accessed by the integration with on-demand transport, which in turn would allow improved service to the local population. So, this year in 2024, the transport sector in Taiwan tried to propose the new service, new on-demand transport service that can address the tourist. They can integrate the tourism industry. But the result, we can see the result in the future months. So in conclusion, our approach to the X&T assessment, which is called spot identification, involves analyzing various factors to determine the optimal location and layout for on-demand transport. And we develop a toolkit to assist practitioners identify ODT service areas and design the service. And the process ensures that we identify the most suitable areas for implementing the ODT service, maximizing their potential benefits. But the limitation of the research is that we only consider the many-to-one or many-to-few operational models. And if we can integrate the methodology that John suggests, perhaps it can provide a more comprehensive approach. Ex-post assessment performance evaluation is crucial as it involves analyzing the performance of ODT after its implementation. We apply the DEA toolkit to do the assessment. This evaluation helps us understand how well the service is functioning and identifies areas of the improvement. So further looking ahead, future studies should focus on several key questions. The first one is, how can we evaluate the ODT performance across different contexts and consider the varying service intention? So as the existing studies show, most of the studies trace that the performance is related to like the use the patronage or use the load factor to evaluate performance, but it might be not really reasonable because some of the on-demand transport should address the service intention, but if we evaluate performance that does not address the social intention or the service purpose of the on-demand transport, it might be biased. And the second question is, how can we select the optimal service area based on empirical insights from performance evaluation? So it means that the anti-assessment approach and the post-assessment approach is not an independent approach. It might be integrated together, and the output of the post-assessment approach can be served as the feedback or the input of the anti-assessment approach. So these questions are essential for refining methodologies and enhancing the effectiveness of on-demand transport service. So overall, this is my presentation today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert. It was excellent. Okay, well, now we are going to move into our Q&A session, and there's still an opportunity to add questions in as we go through, and we'll do our best to get to all of these. If there are any that we don't answer during the webinar itself, what we will do is ask the speakers to provide short written answers to any questions in that category. I'm going to start from the top, as it were. There was an initial question. I think this was probably directed principally at you, John, but the other panelists may have an opinion as well. And the question was, have we undertaken similar research into on-demand transport in regional areas in Australia, where I take the similar to relate to the work that you've been doing, particularly around service level classification, although it could be interpreted more broadly as research into on-demand transport in a regional context. I'll start with you, John.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, there has been research on that, and I did a study in 2023 looking at where it's applicable in regional centers to do that. And so that was a project I was doing for Greater Shepparton in Victoria, and they were interested in knowing where, on-demand transport, that type of service would be applicable. It's so much different than a metropolitan area because regional areas don't have a rail network or a fixed route bus network. They're struggling just to have a local bus network of any sort. So, and there certainly is a role for on-demand in there. But as Sue mentioned, there's so many different ways you can operate it in the regions. It could just be within the town site, or it could be to connect people to another hinterland community or whatever, or it can be just only, it doesn't have to be every day. It could be just as required type services, which is still another on demand, but the demand is not there, all through the day. And it's also can be more for medical and shopping trips, people who need that access to get to shopping, as opposed to people using it to get to work or for a commuter trip. So it's and so in my talk, I was talking mostly in metropolitan areas because that's where there is a service hierarchy. But when you talk about regional cities, there certainly is a role for it, but it's also completely kind of different than a metro city. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Would either of our other panelists like to comment on the regional context and perhaps particularly on any research that you're aware of?
I can only add that so our services our New South Wales services in regions have been very successful, and I think it's like public transport is a very different context in regions. It's not it's not strange to expect then that on-demand services it almost has it's almost parallel to community transport in some respects. And I think what we see in services in New South Wales is that there were trips that wouldn't have otherwise been taken. So, car is king, sadly, in regional locations. If you're less mobile or you don't drive and you're reliant on, other types of services, whether they be taxi services or the like, which are also difficult in regions, that there are a lot of trips that are avoided, which, has implications for social inclusion and a whole range of other, and even the economic health of local communities because people are not, coming out as often as they could. So, so these types of services can be very effective in the overall, providing more personalised trips for people, but also the overall health of regional communities.
Yes, I think those are really important observations, Sue, and it plays into the whole evaluation piece because it is important that these wider aspects, and particularly things like contribution to social inclusion, are actually captured when we're trying to make a good, robust evaluation of experiences with on-demand transport. Now, there was a later question from Sandy Fong, which I think really starts to get to the heart of the matter, and this is actually addressed to all three of our presenters. And the questioner would like to hear your views on agreement and differences on key performance indicators for on-demand transport services. Who would like to go first on that one? Maybe Sue, you've been on both sides of the fence, haven't you? So I think that's one for you to lead on.
I can talk to that from an operational context. So the KPIs, I mean, there's an argument that the current KPIs for normal bus services are not should be updated. So, but certainly, you know, things like on-time running and all of those types of KPIs around services for on-demand are quite different. And in New South Wales, we actually have different KPIs for operators of on-demand than we do for route services for those reasons as well. But the fundamental issue for me always with on-demand is it has to, it's on-demand, so the demand should meet the capacity. And so contractually, you are required to operate a certain amount of vehicles all the time. For on-demand to be successful, operators need to be able to move that the fleet capacity around to meet demand. So, you know, for example, if you've got a football match happening this Saturday night and, you know, more people are moving into the city, you need to be able to reallocate kilometres and hours from the middle of the day or from quieter periods to that period to be able to meet the demand. So it needs to be dynamic. And so when you start to look at how do you make bus contracts and KPIs dynamic, that's certainly a very long conversation. So, but so I guess my main comment is that KPIs that we currently have for bus services are not transferable to on-demand, but equally we need to rethink. We shouldn't be looking to try and fit on-demand into those KPIs. We need to be looking at what are the KPIs that we need to put around these contracted services to make them the most efficient and hold people accountable for providing the most efficient services possible.
Yeah, I think that's again a really powerful point, because we applied, you know, different principles in planning flexible and responsive services as compared to fixed routes. So I think there is a strong case for a different set of KPIs. John, your thoughts on this topic of KPIs for ADT?
In addition to like counting the number of customers and seeing how productive it is, and there are more performance measures, I'd suggest that it would be useful for on-demand transport services to almost do an annual customer survey, because it's understanding who they are, because customers in on-demand services, they're using it for different reasons depending on where they're coming from. So like if they're elderly people or they've got mobility challenges or whatever, they're going to be using it because they don't want to walk to the closest fixed route bus stop, whatever, so it's more convenient for them. Some people are using it because they want to get to their closest high frequency service or train station or whatever, and they're just using it. But that's good to understand, because they're probably not using their car. You're getting them out of the car and they're using the on-demand rather than using a park and ride. And then there's school kids who might be using it, because on-demand is open for anybody and anyone. And also for people using it later night, like after when the fixed route service doesn't operate anymore, you know, people are using it. So my suggestion is to actually do a travel survey to understand the customer's needs, and that could be reported back. But also it would help tailor the service for the next year. So do you need more service at a certain time of day or a certain day of the week? And you can tailor the on-demand service to suit the customer. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you, John. Robert, your thoughts on appropriate KPIs?
Yeah, I think most of the existing literature talking about is using like patronage load factor to be an important indicator, but this may be biased because as on-demand transport service features is on-demand, so the patronage is really low. So what I propose to do is to link the KPI with the service intention. For example, some of the on-demand transport is aimed at providing the connecting service between the public transport hub and the a specific area. So the indicators might be created to measure how the connectivity can be improved after the implementation of on-demand transport. So again, I think that indicators must be linked to the service intention of the on-demand transport more.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Well, I think we could run with this one, and it is very, very important question, particularly when we get to contract specification. But let's move on. We've got some really great questions coming in, and several of them are quite practically focused. So I'm going to move to another question, which I think each of our panelists may have a view on. Considering the high failure rate, we've heard this phrase already several times, for on-demand trials and high operating costs, how long do you recommend that trials operate for? And then this particular questioner is actually writing from a New Zealand context, and they add that while passenger behaviour change may take a while, the funding environment in New Zealand is quite limited, and so they struggle to justify maintaining trials for longer than one to 2 years. But even that relatively short period may be a signal for future performance. But let's keep the question simple. On the basis of your experiences to date, how long do you recommend that ODT trials should operate for? I'm going to go to you first, Sue, because there have been so many trials in the New South Wales context, as you were telling us about.
Yeah, I think the context, I don't think we should be running on-demand trials anymore. I think that we've got enough information about how to run an on-demand trial, that you don't need to run a trial or a pilot in the same way that we were running pilots before. So when we talk about the failure rates of on-demand, and because in Australia, that is New South Wales, the context of that was the government going out to operators and tell us operators how you think you could run an on-demand service. And there were 23 of those pilots, and those pilots were not mostly successful because people didn't really understand, it was a learning, right? It was a learning curve. Since then, the on-demand services that have been introduced have almost entirely been successful. And so what we know about an on-demand service now is that it needs to be able to be delivered within a price envelope. So to deliver an on-demand service, you need to look at where you're running it, where you're going to replace fixed kilometres in your network and repurpose those kilometres to on-demand and those costs to on-demand. So you need to consider the long-term sustainability of that. And then obviously there's a trial of that, but not in the same way that we were trialing before. We've got far too much information now to go back to stage one. And I'm not sure who it is in New Zealand, but I would be very happy to have a chat to them about that. We've spent quite a lot of time in Australia generally thinking about how you apply on-demand to a network in a way that it will give you a higher chance of success, but it will also be able to tell you how much it might cost and where the risks are.
Thanks, Sue. And before I come to John and Robert, just a supplementary for you, because there's a question come in that is also relevant to this topic. Given that there have been quite a number of New South Wales trials overall, 23,
yeah.
23. How were these areas identified in the first place ahead of the service planning being specified?
Yeah,
there might be quite a few people interested in that.
Yeah, and that's the context. I don't know that most people, operators came to the government with proposals. So the government was not prescriptive in any way. The government said to the industry, we want to scale on-demand services across the network within 10 years. And I think the percentage was something like 70%. Like we want to replace 70% of our buses with on-demand services, something like that. So the government essentially threw that out to industry and said, here's what we want. we're not, you tell us how to do that. You operate the services, you know your networks, you come to us. We'll give you some funding upfront to test and trial these things, but you come to us to tell us where you think on-demand can work, and you tell us how you think it could be then scaled across the network. And that's the context to that. And, you know, to be fair to operators, it was relatively new. People didn't know, and people made, you know, made lots of assumptions around, you know, what would work and what wouldn't. And, you know, lots of them were data-based, and a lot of them didn't work out. I mean, a really good example is my own service. You know, I was care ride service, which worked really well, but Macquarie Park. So Macquarie Park in New South Wales, an economic centre about 20 k's, less than 20 k's outside the city. Lots of people coming in the morning peak, lots of people going out. Seemed like a perfect thing for an on-demand services because there's less parking, but it wasn't. So people were driving in from the very edge of the service zone to where they could park to get the on-demand services. So you had all your vehicles at the edge of the service zone in peak hour traffic trying to fight their way back. So trip times were atrocious. So there are lots of really, really good learnings about why things work and why things don't work operationally in an on-demand service. So yes, lots of things didn't continue and were not successful, but the learnings are priceless, and you know that shouldn't be lost in the discussion.
Absolutely, and it has created a living lab environment.
Correct.
I don't want our other two colleagues to miss out on sharing their thoughts on ideal trial length. I know you referred to a number of different schemes, John. Any insights? And you can go beyond Australasia in your answer if you wish.
Yeah, I can. And so anyways, I agree with Sue. There shouldn't be trials. The trials are used to understand the how and the different models. And so there's plenty of learnings from all of that now. But the other thing is, if you introduce a trial, it introduces a lot of uncertainty. So in the public transport, like, is it going to disappear in 6 months or a year or whatever? And the operator doesn't know. And then also you end up getting some loyal customers, and then they're going to be incredibly disappointed if it disappears. Okay. But the other thing is, when a service is implemented, is it replacing a fixed route service, or is it supplementing it? You know, so all of that, and the key thing is it needs to be totally integrated with the rest of the public transport network. It's not just separate. We'll just test it and see, and it's different. It should be. The KPIs should be treated almost like it's a fixed route bus service. So if the patronage disappears, then it's no different than people not using a fixed route service anymore. So it should be, you know, treated the same. And when it's implemented, it should be there as part of the network. For example, there may be cases where you implement an on-demand transport service in an emerging growth area where there's not a lot of housing. But when it's fully established, then you don't, and you can implement a fixed route service, you don't need it anymore. So that shouldn't be considered a trial. It's just a growing market for public transport. But and there's another role for public transport in a lot of these growth areas where it's not a full subdivision. You can't even get into all of the roads in the subdivision because a standard size bus can't get through. So on-demand transport with the smaller buses actually suits in that early stage. So that's a couple of ideas there. One of the other thoughts is that from other cities, and I've looked at this across North America, is that where they've got very well-established public transport in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, they don't have the on-demand transport. They're not, they might have it in a couple of, very remote areas, but on-demand transport is not part of their mix. In cities like Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, medium-sized, metropolitan cities, it certainly is, because you've got a lot of areas that are, in the order of 20 to 30 kilometers from the CBD that all they can afford is a low frequency service, and yet on demand could be an alternative rather than using a fixed route service. So it depends on the maturity of the network and the size of the city. So some cities that are really well established with excellent public transport and metros and all of that, there is no role for, I don't see that there's been any appetite for it in WA and Perth. And I suggest that's because they've got a very well connected feeder bus network into their rail network. And so people can get a regular feeder service that is timed to connect or is running with a frequent service to your local train station. So it's a different situation again. So, but yeah, I would certainly encourage governments not to do trials anymore and just consider it as just an alternative way of implementing, public transport.
Thank you, John. That seems to be a key message. I would like us just to fit in a couple of more questions before we conclude, and this one is going to be directly for you, Robert, because there is interest in the Spot toolkit. So this is a question from Ilya Petushkov. ODT has a very low threshold in productivity, measured in boardings per hour, above which fixed route becomes the only viable solution in providing public transport. Well, John was alluding to that a moment ago. Without either having customers travel much longer than would be reasonable or denying customers service when they need it. So how is this aspect of, so I guess you would say, service design and provision incorporated into the Spot toolkit, and can you use Spot to inform operational capabilities and requirements of an on-demand service?
Yeah. So I think the operational capabilities and requirements is an input parameter in our simulation approach. So after giving these information, then we can simulate by using different context and to yield the result to compare the best service design or service model. But yeah, as John has said, in his presentation, I think that what we need to do further is that we need to identify which kind of service model is expected in different contexts before we do the simulation. So yeah, I think yeah, that's all.
Oh, hold on. Sorry.
Nelson.
Yep, my mistake. Sorry.
That's okay. Someone has to do it, John.
Someone has to do it. Yeah. So I want to conclude another practical focus question, because at the end of the day, we're very keen to understand the factors contributing to the success of on-demand services. This is a question from Richard Tooth, and I'll just ask for a short comment from each of you. To what extent do you feel that regulations, and we'll take that as existing regulations, hinder or add cost to the development of on-demand services? For example, bus size, licensing issues, safety. And if that wasn't interesting enough as a question, do you happen to know how much this varies by jurisdiction? Sue.
So quickly, regulation has a big impact on costs of services, and that's also why trials are difficult. So, mostly there's a vehicle called a Hino Poncho, which is a little bus, which seems to be the choice du jour for on-demand services at the moment, because it meets all the DDA compliance standards of a bus. It's essentially a little bus. But, compared to, $250,000 for one of those vehicles versus $80,000 for a Mercedes Sprinter, it's significantly more cost. So if you're building on demand into your network, where you're going to depreciate that asset over 25 years, that's fine. But if you're running a 12-month trial, investing in that vehicle is cost prohibitive, but equally then you can't make the compliance standards that you need to with the other vehicle types. So there's a whole range of those, really interesting ones around who maintains bus stops. If you go to virtual stops, there's a whole range. How do you ensure that the pick up and drop off locations all meet, compliance standards? There's just a whole range of little legislative things and compliance standards that you need to make. So it's in a trial situation, typically there's exemptions to a whole range of things. When you start to have to integrate these services into networks, it's a very different environment, and it adds cost, it adds time, and it adds complexity.
And it's a topic you need to be aware of.
Yes. Yes.
John, any advice for?
Well, my thought is on-demand transport is not in the general public's knowledge generally. It's because there's selected areas where it is. So if you're on the northern beaches, you would know about it, but a lot of other parts of Sydney might not even know what the concept is all about. So there's still a long way to go to selling the concept. And I've talked to people in here in Adelaide, and they unless they live in Mount Barker, they don't even know what it is. Okay, so it's actually explaining it. But also there is a role for local councils to be involved because they're generally doing the bus stops and the shelters and where people are waiting. And so they need to understand, do they have a role in actually supporting on-demand? And a lot of them want to encourage it, but they're not responsible for the operations, but they are responsible for the footpaths and the walk routes and the bus stops infrastructure. So anyways, that's another consideration, and it's understanding who's responsible for the whole package. Like, is it under the state government, or is it the operator who is actually controlling it?
Yeah, some good points there, and still more work to be done. Like, a good representation of on-demand services within journey planners.
Well, my other comment is it's actually given different names in different parts of Australia. So in Victoria, they've got the name Flexi Ride, and it's promoted differently. And in New South Wales, it's on-demand transport, and then it's given different names, and sometimes it's called DRT, or demand responsive transport. So it's trying to avoid the jargon and make it part of everyday language.
Yep. But I guess that's
everyone knows what a bus is, but not everyone knows what on-demand transport is.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes it important that we, conduct awareness raising and marketing and promotion and so on is that by definition, a flexible bus service does not have the same level of visibility as a fixed route bus service. So that adds to the overall challenge.
Well, here's another one. I mean, I mentioned it to someone, and I said a flexible bus service, and they thought, well, is it a bus that bends in the middle? And I said, no, that's not what it is. So you need to use terminology that the general public can understand.
And Robert, I haven't forgotten you. You're going to have the last word on this topic of regulations hindering or aiding development of on-demand or demand-responsive services, and I wonder if I may, if there is a connection with the Spot toolkit as well, because one of your inputs is best practice information, so that could include information about regulations, I would think. But.
Yes, I think I'm not very familiar with the regulation of on-demand transport, but I think I can contribute to the marketing of ODT. So I think that the brand of the on-demand transport is quite important. Maybe we can propose mixed model which combine the fixed bus road and on-demand transport together. What I mean is that fixed bus road can be a brand that can tell all the residents that yeah, the service is there, and this you can take this route or this bus to anywhere you want. So this is a promotion method to that all the residents know that the service is there. So I think the marketing is quite important for the on-demand transport.
Agreed. On that note, I think that rather reluctantly we will need to call a halt to the proceedings. My thanks again to our three presenters for their tremendous and stimulating presentations. I know that I have learned a lot, and I'm sure it's the same for our audience. We thank our audience as well for being very active in inputting questions, and I hope we managed to get across most of them. The recording of this session will be made available via the ATRF PTRC website, as will indeed information about forthcoming events. We do plan to have to keep this going as an occasional webinar series. So thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. We'll now draw our conclusions to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.